Thanks for having me today to represent IGPC. I guess asking Brendan and Tom and Urbana asking somebody from IGPC Ethanol to talk about our business today. Our CEO, Kevin Norton, would normally fulfill this role, but he had prior commitments. And so, as you could see from my bio, this is not actually my day job. And my 17-year-old son this morning, before I headed into the city, suggested that I start with an off-color joke to loosen the crowd. But you look plenty loose, so I think I'll just leave that as it is. So yeah. So IGPC Ethanol is a cooperative that was formed in 2002 with the purpose of finding a venture to add value to grain crops, in particular corn. It was mainly formed by a group of corn farmers from Brant County, west of Toronto. It took a while to put a project together. In July of 2007, we reached financial close, and in the fall of 2008, the plant and financial close meant we also started construction. In the fall of 2008, the plant became operational. The plant originally was a 40 million gallon US gallon plant for the production of fuel ethanol from the feedstock of corn. In the early years, 08 to 14, we, as the slide shows, have plant optimization. So as I'm sure you would recall, the 08, 09, 010 were highly volatile years in everything, and that included commodities. So we managed to make through that. We got the bugs worked out of the plant over time and started repaying our debt, as well as starting a distribution to our members and shareholders. In the period of 14 through 16, we spent about $30 million on additional plant improvements that added several new, or really mainly two new product lines. One, a type of distillers grain, which was a higher protein, and excuse me. The other one, corn oil. These are all products that come from corn. And so corn oil mainly gets sold into the biodiesel industry. By these investments, we also then increased our throughput of the plant to about 50 million gallons a year. And during that period, we also strengthened our balance sheet. By 2016, we had started looking at expanding the plant, which was completed by 2018. It was a $115 million project to double the plant to 100 million gallons, or for those of you who like metric, 380 million liters a year of fuel ethanol. In more recent times, we've continued to strengthen our balance sheet since the latest expansion, and are at about a 17 million of term debt. We've resumed paying dividends as of last year, and we continue to work towards lowering the carbon intensity of our ethanol. So essentially, IGPC's business is to take our feedstock corn and put it through a fermentation process that then results in three main product groups, each by a third. A third of the weight of corn that comes in becomes ethanol, a third becomes distillers grains, and a third becomes carbon dioxide. The ethanol, or the corn, is priced in US dollars on the Chicago Board of Trade, and so is the ethanol. A new side piece to the ethanol income side is the carbon credits that we now generate under the CFR, the Canadian Fuel Regulation, that came into effect this year. And so we'll talk a little bit more about that in a couple of slides. Distillers grain is essentially like when you ferment corn, you're essentially taking the starch component of corn, and that's the portion that ferments. Everything else that is left of that corn is what distillers grain is. So it is now a product that is 3 times as high in energy and in protein as regular corn, and it gets sold as a feed ingredient to all types of livestock. We have different products in the category of distillers grain, and depending on the product, some are more favored by certain types of livestock. Of course, we're located in Southwestern Ontario, so we're in the heart of Ontario corn growing country and in the heart of the livestock industry in Southwestern Ontario. So on the carbon dioxide side, about 40% of our carbon dioxide is captured and is sold to Air Liquide. And they mainly use that in the greenhouse industry. So as I mentioned, our location, and you know, the person that made this picture, I want to assure you, our plant is not in the middle of Lake Erie. It's actually between the shore of Lake Erie and London, Ontario, and a little town called Aylmer. I didn't make the presentation, and I'm sure I couldn't have done it any better, but I just wanted to clarify that. So we are strategically located for our feedstock, as well as I mentioned, the distillers grain sales, and all of our ethanol is trucked into the GTA. Last year we had $458 million in revenues. We processed 850,000 tons of corn, produced a little over 100 million gallons of low carbon ethanol, and sold 325,000 tons of distillers grain and nearly 13,000 tons of corn oil into the renewable diesel industry, with 88 dedicated employees. So you can tell by the volumes that this is a highly automated facility. So as you can see on this slide, the benefits of producing this ethanol that's blended into gasoline are significant. A reduction of 430,000 tons of carbon, which is an equivalent of 92,000 passenger vehicles or 1 million miles driven. So as far as the Ontario regulatory industry that affects ethanol, as of January 1st, 20, the mandate went to 10% from the previous 5%. I think 5% was in place since just before our plant became operational, so in the early 2000s. Ethanol blended must achieve an average of 45% reduction in carbon intensity versus gasoline. So that is really the driver of the mandate, obviously, is to reduce our carbon and our GHGs. IGPC's plant has a carbon intensity lower than that. This demand under the mandate of 10% ethanol in our gasoline results in an additional need for 350 to 400 million liters of, million gallons of ethanol per year. As of November of 20, Ontario then announced that the renewable content required would increase gradually up to 15% by 2030. And then in 2030, the ethanol blended would have to be 50% fewer GHG emissions as opposed to the current 45% reduction. At the federal level, as I mentioned a little bit earlier, in June of 22, the Minister of Environment and Climate Change announced the CFR, the Clean Fuel Regulation. The oil and gas sector in Canada emits about 27% of the GHGs, and so obviously that is a focus of the government to try to get that reduced. The CFR requires liquid fuels suppliers to gradually reduce their carbon intensity and from the fuels that they produce or sell over time, leading to a decrease of 15% below 16 levels for all gasoline and diesel used in Canada by 2030. The government estimates that requires an additional 200 million gallons of ethanol by 2030 under the CFR. As I mentioned earlier, what that also does, it increases or it creates a credit market with credits from the producers of the renewable fuel. So that's an additional income stream that is put in place, so that then incentivizes industry to do things to reduce the carbon output. This also creates economic opportunities for biofuel producers and other low carbon fuel producers to create and sell credits. So that's the position that we are in now, as well as others. IGPC has an asset base of about $350 million that's been created over the last 14 years and is a significant economic driver in Southwestern Ontario. Both through its purchases of corn as well as other services, and obviously a very significant reducer of carbon emissions in Ontario. We have a seasoned management team with a proven track record of managing risk and deploying our capital, and we've been operational since 2008. Especially with our expansion a few years ago, it has really helped us become a low-cost operator in Canada of ethanol. And we have the support of our lenders, FCC and BDC, and our ties to the agricultural industry in Southwestern Ontario. We have a strong balance sheet, a low debt to EBITDA, as well as supportive lenders. In the near term, ethanol will be the main pathway for compliance under the CFR for gasoline, and therefore creating a significant source of CFR credit revenue with the production of ethanol. Future opportunities that are being explored include carbon sequestration, anaerobic digestion, as well as looking further out towards the future, looking as ethanol as a feedstock for the production of green chemicals. So there's kind of two parts to the future opportunities that we're exploring as a business. The sort of short to medium term part is really focused on lowering our CI, so lowering the carbon intensity of the ethanol that we produce. The more we can lower that, the more valuable our ethanol is compared to our competitors. Further out, medium to long term, obviously EVs are very likely to increase significantly over the years, and as they do, it will mean that the gasoline pool will shrink. As I explained, in the short to medium term, the inclusion rate of the ethanol in that gasoline will actually go up, but long term, the demand for fuel ethanol is still at risk. So by ensuring that our CI is lower, it will also then put us in a better position to look at ethanol as a feedstock for other things like green chemicals and products. Because remembering, and I'm sure you're all very aware of this, but the goal of our governments worldwide, the latest COP negotiations is essentially carbon neutral by 2050. There's a whole lot of things outside of gasoline that are made from fossil fuels that will have to find a way to either be made from something else or to be made with a liquid fuel that is either carbon neutral or much closer to it than what's currently being used. So that's kind of where we expect the future to go. But a lot of those things related to green chemicals and so on either don't have a market that currently exists, or have technology that is in the works but not proven at commercial scale. So it's something that we certainly as a board and management are working on, but in the short to medium term, certainly our focus is on lower carbon intensity fuel ethanol. So the last, I guess this is kind of the biggest update for IGPC in this year, which is that at our last AGM in January of this year, we announced that we were undertaking a comprehensive strategic review of our business with a view to assessing its opportunities and informing its future direction. The intent of this review is to provide IGPC with a fair market value assessment of the business and a strategy for enhancing the value and liquidity of its shares. There has been discussions amongst the board and amongst the membership that share liquidity as a co-op and value of our shares is maybe not reflective of the value of our business, and that's really why this was undertaking. We know that our members and shareholders are interested in stable returns, and we also know that we have an aging membership base that some of which may be looking to exit their investment. We are committed to exploring all opportunities for enhancing shareholder value and liquidity. No assurance is given that this review will result in any particular transaction. After going through a process, a thorough process and an RFP, we selected PwC from 21 firms, including major banks, private equity, independent investment banks, M&A firms, and the Big Four accounting firms to lead that strategic review. They've solicited membership and shareholder feedback through PwC coordinated and conducted survey, including virtual, in-person, and focus groups. We've received a draft report, and we are expecting the final report shortly, and we will then be reporting back to our membership and shareholders next month. We had outlined at our AGM that we would report back no later than our next AGM, which is this January. But as it looks at the moment, we will be reporting back sooner. And so that's kind of where things are at. And I think that's the last of my slides. So I'm open to any questions. I think I got a bit of time left. So.
Yeah, hi. Is the aerobic digesting, is that for sort of non-food quality products like agricultural waste?
Well, so we could take part of our stream, part of our liquid stream that gets added back. It's separated in the process and then gets added back to the distiller's grain that go for livestock feed. Instead of doing that, we could make that the main feedstock to run an anaerobic digester. Now, there is then opportunities outside of that to maybe add things like corn stover or to add things from the green bins kind of thing. It depends on the economics and your location, whether that makes sense or not, right? And then ultimately what you could do from that is produce natural gas that could either then replace the natural gas we currently use or just inject it into the natural gas pipeline that we're tied into, right? And the overall goal would again be to, improve your economics and reduce your CI. So, but the main feedstock would actually be that stream that we add back to the distillers, but we don't have to. We just do because we don't want to waste it. But if the anaerobic digester gave us a better outcome, then we would pursue that. It's something we've looked at over time, and a few years back we looked at it and we kind of put it on hold because it didn't make economic sense. But obviously things are changing all the time, and so that's just a kind of a short list of 2 or 3 things that I'm willing to share, but there's lots of things we're looking at to continue to lower our CI and position ourselves for the future.
You said your net asset value is $350 million. What would be the major?
I said our asset base is $350 million.
Okay, pardon me. What are the major components of that number?
It's the plant. It's a 49-acre site and the plant that we operate to take corn and turn it into fuel ethanol.
So your day job is a farmer.
I farm.
So I'm wondering what makes IGPC attractive to you as a farmer?
Well, so I got involved. I've been on the board since almost too long to remember, I guess. I've been on the board since 06. So before, when I got on the board, about 25 million was raised from about 400 or 500 members. There's not a requirement to be a farmer, but most were. I got involved. I guess I'm getting older than I'd like to admit, I guess. I remember back to the days where, especially on the grain crop side, farmers were really struggling to make a living. And there was a lot of protest tractor parades up to Ottawa to try to get the government to give more support to the farmers. And I was, along with the founding directors back in 2002, was of the opinion that we were better off to try to find ways to add value to our products. And that was really the start of IGPC. And so initially, the idea behind IGPC was that if a farmer was growing corn and he wasn't making money in the field, then he would probably make it in his investment in the ethanol plant. Now, that concept has changed over the years because ethanol use in gasoline and therefore corn use across North America has become so significant that it's become a commodity. So it's not necessarily the case that if a farmer is not making it in the field, he's making it in the ethanol plant, because ethanol is to some degree a margin business. So that is different from the very early days. And of course, the other difference is that our membership base has changed. It has aged, and we've had some new members and so on. So there has been changes.
Might be, for that question, tell Patrick how much of Ontario's corn crop you actually buy every year.
Yeah, in a typical year, we buy about 10% of all the acres of corn in Ontario go through our plant.
So in the
Like all of the province of Ontario.
So in the theme of revenue diversification, can you give us a little bit of a insight into that, the carbon credits and what that potentially could add?
Well, and so of course we get asked that, and our members and shareholders also want to know that because it's a new income stream. All I can say is that it has the potential to be significant. I can't give you more information than that, kind of for two reasons. One, because we've made agreements, and I'm not at liberty to give details, because then you could figure out what the value is, and that would be a bad thing compared to our competitors. The other part, in all fairness, is that market in Ontario and Canada, and I'm really in Ontario, because for instance in BC, there is a carbon credit market that's been operating for a while that includes what we're talking about here, and there is in places like California and Oregon and other states. But in Ontario, it's so new that it's, at the moment, I would say, kind of not fully discovered, it's volatile. Everybody's trying to find their way. So time will tell exactly where the values will lay over time, but it's also fair to say that the value is likely to be significant, just like it's significant in other markets. But our number one income stream is still the ethanol itself. So.
Adrian, first of all, thank you for being a farmer.
Oh, you're welcome.
No, really. I mean, you're probably one of the most productive people in this room. Although I'll just speak for myself. Can you just talk to us a little bit about competition? Is it more regional?
Yeah. So there's several layers, as I think there often is, to competition. So the one part is that we're a very efficient producer to get it into the GTA, which is a large market. And Ontario and Canada are very significant importers of ethanol. To give you an understanding, Canada is the number one importer of ethanol from the US, and the US is the biggest producer of ethanol in the world. Right, so that helps you understand that Canada is a big buyer. Now, of course, the bulk of the U.S. ethanol gets used in the U.S., but out of the export portion, Canada is the number one recipients of those exports. So we have to compete with the U.S. ethanol plants, because they will ship into Canada, as they are, because we're certainly not filling the market. And so the U.S. ethanol producers are also working on their carbon intensity. And so besides the normal challenge of staying profitable, we have to make sure that as we go forward and this carbon intensity, these carbon credits become more significant, that we stay competitive there, right? Because we could lose some competitive advantage if we didn't. Overall, in the big picture, the biggest income stream is still the fuel ethanol, which is priced in Chicago. So it's, it's an open market, everybody can see that. And then there's a local basis attached that factors in, the exchange and the logistics, which is actually very similar to corn, right? Corn is priced at the Chicago Board of Trade. Then there's a local basis to adjust for the exchange rate and the logistics. So does that kind of answer your question?
Is your feedstock your inputs bought on contract or in the open market?
So we will forward buy corn for some period of time, but only as far as we can offset it with sales on the ethanol side. So you can actually go out quite a few years on corn on the Chicago Board of Trade, but ethanol is actually does not go out very far. And so you're kind of limited that way. And so the further you go out, usually it becomes less favorable to do that. So,
is one of the options for the future of IGPC to open up a second plant, or is that very far out in the future, if at all?
Well, I guess we just finished an expansion not too long ago, and it was a doubling of our plant. I would say there's no plans for that at this time. A lot of it depends on what is the runway for fuel ethanol, right? And there's lots of opinions about that. If you listen to the politicians, we'll all be EVs by 2030, right? Part of my sideline on the farm is I have about 40,000 square feet of buildings that I store cars and boats and trailers in for winter storage. And when I see the 40-foot fifth wheel trailers coming in, it doesn't look like we're going EVs all that quick. But just to be clear, I or the board or management of IGPC are not saying, you know what, we're a great thing because EVs are never going to happen. We're not of that belief at all. We do think more will come along. It's a matter of how quickly that will happen and what that will look like and so on. So to answer your question is there's no plans for that. How quickly the transition from fuel ethanol to other uses of ethanol will happen, like for instance, probably the most talked about one is SAF, sustainable aviation fuel. Jet airlines, as our CEO explained to me, he said they fly on the same stuff that they made, kerosene, that they made in the 1930s, and it's still just as dirty as it was in the 1930s. And so, and you know how much more people are flying every year? Well, ethanol, fuel ethanol, corn-based ethanol could be a feedstock for SAF. There's some plants that are already working on doing that. So it all depends on how things are going to play out over the next number of years. That's a really long answer to a short question, and I apologize for that. We've got Brendan would know our vice chair, Joe, and whenever we have a board meeting and there's a question or we have a discussion, Joe always says, if you want the short answer, ask me, and if you want a long answer, ask Adrian. So, yeah, so.
Adrian, just a quick question on those future initiatives. Are they factoring into the corporate structure? Like, is that part of the capital intensity of those future initiatives? Is that factoring into the potential change in corporate structure?
Well, and so I'm being told here I'm running out of time, so this will be my last question. But it's a great question. I would say that this strategic review is looking at all aspects of our business. And so it includes looking at whether our business structure is the right one. And of course, it could be the right one for now and maybe not for later, right? And so if that answers your question.